Hello, my history-loving friends. Today we are back in Egypt. It is 1942. The war in North Africa rages, and soon the Allies will be launching an invasion into mainland Italy. But to do this, they must first capture the Suez Canal and secure their supply lines to the east. With German tanks rolling ever closer to the Great Waterway, the Egyptian people were understandably nervous. As one London newspaper put it, quote, "The situation was becoming increasingly serious. With the threat of war looming over the region, many Egyptians began fleeing the cities for the safety of the countryside. But that proved to be a bad idea because the Germans never stopped at the outskirts of town. They attacked right through the center of Cairo itself. And in October, when an entire division of Italian soldiers came ashore at Alexandria, all hope seemed lost. The city fell into chaos as the local defenders fled the onslaught, leaving the civilian population to fend for themselves. But help did arrive. Canadian and South African troops sped to the front and pushed the invaders back. Though seriously weakened, both sides prepared for a last stand at a place called the Qattara Depression. This was an area of low land between two mountain ranges. And it was here where the fortunes of the war would be decided. For the Axis powers, victory here would mean the seizure of the canal and possibly the collapse of the entire British Empire. For the Allies, winning at Qattara would open up the possibility of advancing across the Libyan desert and striking at the very heart of Nazi Germany. In fact, after ordering his troops to take the city, Hitler himself declared, quote, "From this point onwards, there can be no turning back. We must go forward." And so under the blazing Egyptian sun, the armies of Europe faced off. But what if I told you Egypt helped win the war, not with guns or bombs, but with a decoy? You see, while the fighting raged along the front line, a much more sinister battle was being fought in the shadows. A shadow war, a battle of wits and daring, a battle of deception. It was 1943. The tide of the war had turned decisively in favor of the Allies. And now all that stood between them and Berlin was a small group of elite German soldiers holding out inside the Qattara Depression. But the problem facing Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery was how to get them out. Monty, as he was affectionately known, was one of Britain's most famous generals, having achieved several stunning victories over the Germans. But his biggest challenge was yet to come. You see, before launching his final assault on the Germans, Monty wanted to know exactly where their reinforcements were coming from. This information could only be obtained from a captured German officer. But getting close enough to interrogate him was proving impossible. Every time Montgomery's men got close, the Germans retreated deeper into the desert, and so the general hatched a plan. He would order his men to attack directly into the desert, drawing the Germans out of their defensive positions. But to make the trap irresistible, Monty needed bait. He chose one of his own officers to play the role of a captured general. But not just any officer, mind you. No, Monty needed someone who looked exactly like him. Enter Major Harry Lomas, a British Army officer whose resemblance to Monty was uncanny. So the plan was simple. A team of commandos would sneak into the German lines and drop a message that read, quote, "I am General Montgomery. I have been captured and wish to parley with your senior officers," signed by the look-alike. Then the whole thing would be repeated in German. The next day, Montgomery would launch his attack into the desert and hopefully capture the Germans before they realized the ruse. If it worked, the Germans would come running to negotiate the surrender of the look-alike, only to be captured themselves. But there was a problem. There was more than one way to escape from a battlefield. And while Montgomery's men were attacking from the front, German planes were dropping off reinforcements behind enemy lines. Flying back to base was out of the question. The Luftwaffe controlled the skies. So the only option left was to move secretly through the Egyptian desert undetected. So on the night of March 1943, two trucks carrying 200 soldiers slipped past the front lines and raced towards Cairo. The drivers had orders to stop at nothing to reach the city. In fact, they were even given permission to run over any civilians in their path. One soldier later recalled, quote, "If we had been challenged, we were instructed to drive straight ahead and run anybody off the road. It didn't matter who or what they were, whether they were friend or foe, Red Cross or what, we were not to stop." As dawn broke, the convoy arrived safely outside Cairo and its weary passengers poured out into the street. They had made it, but what happened next was far beyond anyone's wildest expectations. You see, since the war began, life in Cairo had changed dramatically. At the start of the conflict, the city had a population of around 1 million people. But today, the number of Allied troops stationed there had swelled the city's ranks to nearly 3 million. More than half of Cairo's entire population was made up of servicemen, women, and defense contractors. And with so many soldiers in such a small space, life in the city was anything but normal. One British captain later described it as, quote, "a city full of loose women, black marketeers, profiteers, thieves, beggars, hawkers, touts, idlers, drunkards, all sorts of undesirable characters," end quote. Even worse, food was scarce and rumors abounded of impending famine. Any supplies sent to the city were immediately commandeered by the military, leaving little for the common people. And as a result, violent crime and sexual assault had skyrocketed. According to one account, there were something like, quote, 17 murders and 600 cases of serious assault reported every week. And so, as the German commandos made their way through the city, they were met with a sight that was both familiar and shocking. Soldiers in uniform strolled the streets, buying illegal narcotics from pushers and carousing in the nightclubs until sunrise. Some of them were even married to Egyptian women. One commando later recalled, quote, "Cairo was probably the most disreputable city in the world. Men lived on the edge of their seats. Everything went. Gambling, drinking, smoking, women prostitution, black markets. The whole place was morally bankrupt. All of this meant that moving around the city was incredibly dangerous. At any moment, the commandos could be robbed, beaten, or killed. But they pressed on because they had supplies dropped from the rear. These were packages containing cash, forged papers, and civilian clothes. Each package had to be picked up in person. And to do that, the commandos had to venture deep into the heart of Cairo. Their first stop was a neighborhood called Garden City, which might sound pleasant, but was in reality the city's red light district. There they met a local pimp who gave them forged papers identifying them as Italian nationals. Then it was off to a shop to buy civilian clothes. But it wasn't easy finding things that fit. After all, these were British soldiers in the middle of the Egyptian desert. One commando later recalled, quote, "We had no idea what Italian civilians were supposed to look like. We just did our best. Once they were dressed and in disguise, the commando teams fanned out across the city, looking for a way to get to the coast. Their plan was simple. They would find a ship sailing to Italy and stow away in the hold. But getting onto a boat disguised as an Italian soldier was no easy task. Most of the ships docked in Cairo were either packed with troops or flying the Red Cross, and so the commandos had to be extremely careful. In the end, they found passage on a seemingly ordinary cargo ship bound for Naples. On the night of April 1943, they slipped aboard unnoticed and settled in for the journey of their lives. One soldier later recalled, quote, "It was dirty, dark, and smelly, but I didn't care. I was on my way home." Meanwhile, unaware that their men were sneaking onto boats in the middle of the night, Montgomery's commanders were planning the final assault on the Qattara Depression. All that stood between them and victory was a small group of elite German soldiers led by one man, General Alfred Toep. He had brought his men to Egypt specifically to defend the Afrika Korps, and he would not go down without a fight. In fact, as Montgomery's men approached the depression, they came under heavy fire from well-concealed machine gun nests. Despite being badly outnumbered, Trooper refused to surrender. He knew that if he did, his men would be executed, so he dug them in and prepared for a siege. Meanwhile, the commando units were finally making their way home. One by one, they left Cairo, boarded ships, and headed north. But there was still one small problem. They had no way of knowing whether the ruse had worked. Had Montgomery captured the general, or would they return to find the Germans in control? It would be weeks before they received an answer. In the end, it was a resounding success. On April 1943, the same day the commandos left Cairo, Montgomery's men launched their assault on the Qattara Depression. As they drove the Germans back, they stumbled upon an abandoned command post and inside it a single man, badly wounded but still alive. He was German. In fact, he was General Trupp himself. The rest of his men had either been killed or captured. And so the battle was over before it even began. Later, Trupp was taken to Cairo to face trial for war crimes. But before that, Montgomery had a personal message for him. He ordered the general to be handed over to the unit who had captured him, the lookalikes. And then he added, quote, "Tell them I am the real Montgomery and congratulate them on their splendid work. After the war, many of the soldiers involved in the ruse returned home. Others stayed in Egypt, starting new lives under new identities. But wherever they went, they carried with them the memory of a city that had changed them forever. Thank you so much for watching. Please like, share, and follow for more untold stories from the Arab world. Until next time.